Thank you, Dr. Williams. It's been my pleasure as well to become acquainted with Dr. Williams in the process of finally coming to E-Town and just talking a few business things as well. I have to say I didn't know a lot about Elizabethtown College prior to 2 or 3 years ago, but you know, the more I've been exposed, you know, the more good things I really see up here. And I think the faculty, one thing I noticed is some of the meetings, the faculty is really engaged. They are really, they're here for a reason. They're not here just to do a job, and I think that that's a wonderful thing. One of the questions I get asked all the time is about our industry, I should say, is why are there so many potato chip companies in Pennsylvania? So I travel to North Carolina with my relatives out in Indiana. They can't get these chips or they can't get these pretzels. Why does central Pennsylvania have so many offering so many different companies? The rest of the country does not. And so what I'm going to attempt to do today is answer that question. And my answer will be a theory because it's always a theory. It's never exact proof. It's a little bit like history. I like history a little bit, and you'll kind of see that in the presentation. I'll go through a little bit of the history of the potato chip, but I always have an interest in things historic and history, and I think it helps to tell a story. And, it's an interesting way to learn about things. All right, I'm going to need a tutorial. Oh, what's the?
This one, I think you just hit this.
That way?
Yeah. Let's see what it says next. I think if you just hit it, it'll move. It'll move. Want me to advance it?
Yeah. What is the? This way over here.
Yeah, you want to do it on the keyboard too. Just hit that down there. Put that. Look in the underneath, right where you are, right there. The keyboard slides out.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was here early. I still didn't get it. There we go. All right. For potato chips, everything starts with an idea. The invention of the potato chip, pretty much the only thing anybody can agree on is it happened in 1853. There's a number of different legends. They all center around a chef in Saratoga Springs, New York, who got a complaint from a customer, said the French fries were too thick. Apparently he thought the complaint had a little bit of attitude with it. And so he said, okay, we'll make them thin. And he made some very thin French fries, and that is the legend of the first potato chip. Now, between that time and the late 1890s, potato chips are not well known. They're just basically a resort, a restaurant, kind of a delicacy. They're not marketed in general stores, or they're not generally known to most people. Around the late 1890s, some businessmen with originally with horse-drawn carts, but also with the first truck vehicles, began to make potato chips in their kitchen or their garage on some kind of small basis. And they would sell these in the local shops, whether it was a corner market or the farmer's market. And there's basically a very localized business. Because they didn't have a good package, these potato chips would only last 1 or 2 or 3 days before they would get stale and exposed to the air. Depending on the time of the year. In the winter, they might last a little longer. So they really couldn't grow the business very much. They had to work just in the local markets, and they were brands. Every little town had their own shop that would make this. Around 1935, the glassine bag was invented. And the first company to use it was a company called Laura's Gutters in California. They were the first company to use this bag, and it grew rapidly because with this package, potato chips can now last 4 or 5 weeks in the package. And so now the companies can make potato chips on a bigger scale. And at the same time, equipment was invented that would mass produce potato chips. So instead of making a batch of chips in a small kettle, they can now make potato chips 500 pounds an hour or 1,000 pounds an hour, and then they could produce them on a massive scale and deliver them to grocery stores. So this was the era of rapid growth. During World War II, potato chips were deemed an essential food, which was critical because things that weren't essential in World War II, they were rationed or they were eliminated entirely. Things like automobile production. No new cars were produced because the steel was needed for the war effort. But somehow or another, somebody deemed potato chips to be an essential food, and so the manufacture was permitted during the war, and this kept all these companies in business, and it also increased the sales and the growth of the industry. And at this time in the 50s, there are, I don't know, I've never seen a good count, but there are literally thousands of different potato chip companies. By one account, the city of Detroit had 20 different chip companies inside the city limits. I've seen stats where Milwaukee had like 50 chip companies. But there were potato chip companies in virtually every town and city in the country. Around 1960, we see a new era emerging. And this is where Frito-Lay starts to become a power, a nationwide power. Herman Lay was really a pioneer in the marketing of potato chips. He was a tremendous salesperson, and he grew the Lay's potato chip company very rapidly. He bought out a lot of smaller companies and combined them together. And then in the 60s, he merged with the Frito company, which made the corn products. So when you think of Frito-Lay today, you think of Lay's chips, but you also think of Doritos and Tostitos and the Fritos corn chips. And they were part of the Frito company, and merging those two together was a brilliant move for Lay's because it gave them a much larger presence in the industry. So in the 60s and 70s, they are growing rapidly, and a lot of smaller companies are going out of business because of various reasons. Could be economies of scale. The larger companies have better economics of scale. It could be generational. You know, their business didn't transfer from one generation to another. Also, at the same time, the grocery industry is changing from mom and pop stores and small stores to bigger and bigger grocery stores, and that would favor dealing with larger vendors and not with the smaller vendors. And at the same time during this period, we're starting to see, as with just Frito, but other places too, potato chips are seeing competition from corn chips, from tortilla chips, from Doritos. Now locally in Pennsylvania, at this same time, 3 of the bigger regional companies, Wise, Butch, Hers, they are continuing to do well. You know, they're well-managed operations, and they are not being affected by the Frito-Lay influence in the market. And so they're not struggling, they're actually being successful at this time. After that time period, we enter what I call, and a lot of people have called, I didn't invent this term, the snack wars. And this is the 80s and the 90s. And because of Frito-Lay becoming a dominant player in the snack food business, other large companies took notice and said, hey, wait a minute. There's only one company. It's a nationwide snack food company. There's got to be room for 2. We got to get in there and get a shot at this, because why would we let Frito-Lay have the lion's share of the nationwide snack market? And at that time period, Frito-Lay would have had roughly 2/3 of the U.S. snack food market share. And that is approximately the amount they have today. So that number hasn't changed a whole lot, but that was the case, and other companies looked at this and said, hey, here's an opportunity. So Anheuser-Busch, the big beer company, Budweiser, they said, wow, they've got the money. You know, they are number one in the beer industry. Snacks are like beer. We should be able to move in there and do this. And they spent about 15 years and somewhere between $50 and $100 million in losses over that time trying to get into the snack food business. And eventually they gave up. They never did have a profitable year. And they never really did come to grips with why they failed to succeed. They certainly made a good quality product. Everybody that objectively looked at the products said that Eagle made good products, and it was good value. The price wasn't too high. But the one thing that I think most people agree that they didn't take into consideration was the distribution aspect. The snack food business is very much about distribution. If you don't have distribution efficiency, it's very difficult to succeed because your economics are damaged and the margins aren't that great. You can say that about any part of the food industry. Everything in food is close to commodity driven and the margins are never all that high. So if you have some kind of disadvantage, you will not be in business too long. So Anheuser-Busch tried this. They're also a little bit of a victim of bad timing. At the same time that they're trying to take over the snack food business, Borden, originally known for milk and other products, they decided to try a different strategy. Instead of creating one name and going across the country, they bought up about 8 or 10 of the popular regional companies. They bought the one you know the most probably around here is Wise potato chips. They bought Wise first. They bought Jay's in Chicago. They bought Moore's in the Southeast. They used a whole sort of mosaic of different regional companies, and they tried to tie the brand in a little bit with the packaging, but they were really never successful. And they had some of the same problems Eagle had distribution-wise. They just didn't have enough critical mass to be economically viable. And because they're in there at the same time as Eagle, they started a new trend that also hurt their economics, and that was what is known as slotting fees. Prior to the 80s, slotting fees did not exist for the supermarket business. And what slotting fees are is when the producer pays the store for space on the shelf. And you can see evidence of slotting fees in many different retailers. If you go into a Toys R Us, and you see a nice 20 feet of Legos in that Toys R Us. You see a brand of toys in a certain section. And if you go into a Lowe's, you see, there's an end cap that has Makita power tools on the end cap. Those are examples of slotting fees. Lowe's did not do that out of thoughtfulness or goodness of their heart. Those space was bought for, and the same thing happened at Toys R Us. And the same thing was happening in the grocery stores. So Eagle would come in and say, hey, we really need, we want 8 feet of space, 8 feet wide, all the way up and down, and it's going to be $1,000 a foot per store. They're going to spend that kind of money, and so Borden is fighting that. And what happened in between all this is with the two big guys coming into the marketplace and paying money for space and doing a lot of promotions and discounting, is across the country, the smaller companies were not able to compete with that. So they got their space reduced, or they got bought out by Borden or somebody else, or they just decided to get out of business. So during that time period, a lot of these companies went out of business. Now the result of that is the companies that did survive were in a better position, because after the mid-90s, Eagle gave up, and Borden's companies sort of divested, and they weren't as powerful as they were before. So in the last 20 years, what's changed in the business, once they got through this snack war sort of thing, is we've gotten to an era where innovation is more important. what kinds of different flavors, what different products people are coming out with. Kettle chips became more popular. And other concerns. Customers are more involved now than they were 30 years ago. Before it was marketing was driving what customers wanted, and more recently customers are starting to drive companies to meet their needs with the feedback that comes through social media and Facebook. It's really made a big difference. Nutrition science is out there. I mean, every year we see a different sort of diet fad, whether it's Atkins or other advice, whether it's related to salt. Salt has long been vilified as a bad actor, and obviously potato chips are a salty snack. And more recent studies coming to light have shown salt to be more neutral to your health and not as big of a risk as it was thought before. You probably all recognize the brands on this page. These are some of the brands made in Central PA. If we look at the sales as they exist today for potato chips in the United States, out of the top 15 potato chip brands, 6 of them are made in Central PA. And the most amazing thing is out of the top 6, 4 of them are Central PA brands. So there is a huge concentration of snack food business in Central PA. We around here like to refer to us as the snack food capital of the world. It sounds a little bit like a boast, but it really is true. Reading has, I'm talking about potato chips here, but on the pretzel side, Reading has tremendous amounts of pretzel production. There aren't any great stats available, but I believe somewhere around half of the pretzels that are made in the United States are made in Pennsylvania. And somewhere around 20% of the potato chips are made in Pennsylvania. And the headquarters for these companies, the largest companies, are in PA. So if you look at that top list, the 5th one down the list is the kettle chip. You may have seen that in sort of the natural wild. That's made in Oregon and Wisconsin. Number 7, Old Dutch, is a Minnesota chip. Golden Flake is down in Alabama. And Pinnacle Foods is made up of multiple companies in Ohio and Western PA, including Snyder's of Berlin. Shears is in Ohio. Better Made is Detroit. Mike Sells is Ohio. Snack King is Illinois. So after PA, Ohio is really the second state that makes the second most production of potato chips are in Ohio. So PA and Ohio together is really the potato chip center of the U.S. And there's just a list of a few more brands you may know around here: Pickles, Box, etc. So why Pennsylvania? How did this happen? How did we end up with all these chip companies left in PA when throughout most of the country they've gone out of business through competitive forces? One of the key things is the efficiency of the delivery system. DSD is a direct store delivery. And that is, when you see the trucks, you see the chip trucks, they look like a bread truck. They're out delivering to the stores. And a huge expense for getting a product to the market is the DSD system. And when you have a good population density like we have in the Northeast of the United States, you have a much more efficient system, because for the same amount of driving, you can do more sales. And when you stop at a store, the store is doing more volume. So there's a huge efficiency to DSD when you have a dense population. If you get to somewhere like Montana, it's going to be, they're going to have one brand. There's not going to be a lot of room for more than 1 or 2 brands. The other factor for Pennsylvania is agriculture. We've got access to potatoes that are grown within 200 miles in several states: New Jersey, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan. So we really have a good geographic center for where potatoes are grown. And also, I would say another factor is that some of the larger regionals have really been well managed through the years. And so they've stayed in business. And what that has done is, by them staying in business, is they've kept Frito-Lay from having that 2/3 market share. So in this marketplace, Frito-Lay's market share is closer to 1/3 rather than 2/3. And that prevents them from having a dominating impact on the grocery stores that they would in other states. So even though it seems a little counterintuitive that having more competitors would actually make it a safer place for a smaller company to exist, it does. The impact for PA is with this cluster or concentration of industry, is there's a lot of jobs in Pennsylvania related to the snack food industry, and a lot of revenue that stays local, and indirectly we're exporting to other states, so that's good for our economy. And we're also supporting the agricultural base, so the ag business is good in Pennsylvania. It's not as good as it used to be. The PA acreage for potatoes has declined in recent years, but there's some developments coming along that should improve that in the near future. They are working on genetically modified potatoes. You've seen through the corn and the wheat and the soybean crops, they are mostly GMO now. And potatoes at the moment are basically zero GMO, but they are working on potatoes that will store in the Pennsylvania, potatoes you can grow in Pennsylvania, store in Pennsylvania, and use through the winter. Right now, the kinds of potatoes we grow in PA will not store through the winter, and the potatoes we use in the winter come from Michigan and Canada and upstate New York. So what I'd like to do, if I kind of broke my talk up into two pieces. I've got a part on potato chips, and I've got a little bit of some personal stuff. And what I'd like to do at this time is maybe take some questions that you may have about the potato chip industry in PA, and then I'll talk about, after we do that, I'll talk about a few personal things. Yes?
What did Frito-Lay do to go nationwide that other companies couldn't?
You know, I think it was really the vision of Herman Lay and his salesmanship, and he was just one of the best at what he did. I think it really came down to that person. He had a great ability, he did a good job, and he was at the right place at the right time. It'd be a good case study to see how he did it, because you're right. Why did he emerge out of the pack and nobody else did? Yes.
What are your favorite potato chips?
My favorite potato chip?
Yeah.
Well, I like a flavor would be barbecue waffle. If I like a plain chip, it would be our regular kettlebell.
Okay.
No, that's my favorite.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Why does the potato not work in the wintertime?
For PA, you get too much bruising because the soil in Pennsylvania has too many rocks in it. So you get bruises, and what the bruise does on a potato is it makes a dark spot. So then you've got dark edges or a dark spot of potato chip instead of a plain white chip. So what they're trying to do with GMO is get a potato that doesn't bruise. And if it doesn't bruise, we could store it. The other thing they're working on is a potato that will store cold. Right now, potatoes have to be stored, I think, in the high 40s or low 50s. If they could store it colder, they could store it longer. And that would take us into April, May, to this time period. Right now, we get potatoes from Florida, so we have to truck potatoes all the way up from Florida because the storage potatoes are starting to turn at this point. So it's interesting stuff, but it's 4 or 5 years away from being mainstream. And it's being developed by the people who make French fries because they use the most potatoes of anywhere.
How does the potato chip industry deal with rising health concerns? It seems, new things are demonized. Fat is bad. No, it's salt. No, it's sugar. Like, how does the industry that uses, a little bit of all these things, and might not be the healthiest of foods, deal with health concerns like that?
That's a great question because I don't think we've really answered it very well. I think too many companies have been defensive about it instead of trying to be objective and realistic, and that is, too much of anything is not gonna be good for you. And you do have to treat yourself, and you have to get a balance, like everything in life, you need a balance. You have to have a treat once in a while, but, you know, you can't turn a potato chip into a salad,
Yeah.
no matter what you do. So you have to just recognize that. Interestingly enough, if you look at United States sales by pounds in total, potato chips are really not going down, but they've leveled off. They've pretty much leveled off, and so they're not, the sales of chips aren't dropping as fast as you might think based upon what you see on the television and so forth. You read the paper. Sure.
How does the use of different kinds of oil affect the overall like health of potato chip? Like we've been experimenting with
Well,
coconut oil, things like that.
yeah, different oils have slightly different health characteristics, but as much as anything, it's somewhat marketing based, because what people believe, the perception is reality when you're selling things. So if you can find, you know, an oil that's got a better perception, it's a big plus. If you look, I've got samples outside here. We've got a gold bag that's called kettle gold. We've got a white bag kettle chip. That's a good example of two radically different oils. The sunflower is a lighter oil with an almost peanutty taste. The shortening is on the kettle chip, has no oil taste whatsoever, but it has a harder mouthfeel, so it has a different mouthfeel. It has a little bit of trans fat, which is today's negative on fat characteristics. One of the issues you have with nutritional studies is the study from 30 years ago is different than the study from 20 years ago, which is different from the study from 10 years ago, which is different than today's. So these things evolve over time, and it's hard to figure out, you know, with what degree of certainty are we really attaching when we get these reports about nutrition science.
As Martin's market your potato chips, sir, what's your best form of advertising? I want to say I can remember way back when, infamous Frito Bandito. Okay, maybe not lanes where they're at today.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was a catchy thing for kids and everything like that, way back when.
So our marketing is basically in store. We don't have radio or TV or billboard or traditional marketing. Where we spend our funds is in the store to get displays. If you go into a store and you've seen them all the time, where you walk in the entrance or somewhere in the ends, there's a display, cardboard display that has product in front of the customers. That's where we spend our marketing resources, because we think impulse buying is a big key to snacks and being seen. Not everybody's walking up that snack aisle. They may not be stopping. But if you can get that position in a high traffic area, that's where we think there's a lot of value.
Can you just talk a little bit about the trend in grocery stores towards larger retailers and how it's impacting you guys, like our slotting fees going up, stuff like that?
I wouldn't say slotting fees are going up. Sometimes there's just no ability to even enhance your position. And it is true. I think this is a trend for almost every industry is consolidation. There are fewer companies, and they're larger, and the larger companies prefer to deal with other larger companies. That's just the nature of things. We buy cardboard. We use cardboard boxes. There used to be about 8 huge companies that made cardboard. They're down to about 4. It's still a competitive business. I mean, we still get good pricing on cardboard, but there's fewer companies than there used to be. Same thing would be true with packaging, film, and in our industry there are fewer retailers. You know, everybody knows Walmart came out of nowhere. They're now #1 in the grocery business. Kroger is #2, but they're not up in our market. Pennsylvania is a little bit unique in that respect. I think there's more independent grocery stores in Pennsylvania than there is in most other states. That I'm not sure why, but there does seem to be that that situation, and I think it is helpful to companies like us. Any other questions? On a personal note, I just thought I'd share a little of my, what I want to call this, my 2 cents, maybe, about things. I think sometimes people are always looking for a little bit of magic. You know, what's your secret? Or how do you do this? What's the trick? And my answer to that is there really is no magic. And that sometimes doing the ordinary things are enough to make you stand out. You know, you're just well dressed, you're on time, you follow the principles. I think you guys have all read the 7 Principles book. Steve Covey, is that pretty much it?
Haven't read it yet.
No.
We talked a little bit about
Talk a
some
little
of
bit
the
about it.
principles.
I think that's somewhere in your curriculum. Things like that, just the ordinary stuff, I think is important, it gets overlooked. And you're gonna hear this from everybody, be yourself, you know. You can't say that enough. Trying to be somebody else is transparent, people can see that if you're not being yourself. And also, you won't like it either, you know, so over time, it'll wear on you. So I think it's really important that you keep your individuality. Now, what seems contrary to that, but is also important, is to try something uncomfortable. I think anybody that knew me when I was in college or high school would tell you that I was pretty shy. I'd be the last person to ever want to do any public speaking at all. I mean, I would avoid that like the plague. I just want to blend in. And my first job at Nestle, they had a group they called the Office Club. They got together for a couple of parties a year. It was basically all the salaried employees, probably 150. They probably had 150 salaried employees. Somewhere around the 4th year, I got roped into being elected president of the Office Club. I'm not sure why. I think because nobody else wanted to do it. And we get to the Christmas party, and I realized I got to give a little talk. I'm not sure why, but I had to. And I just had a terrible time with it. You know, I had something written out. You know, I was an engineer, right? So you got to write things out. I had it all written out. So I went through this thing and I read this speech, and then I was followed by the MC of our evening ceremonies for the Christmas party. And this guy was good. He was sharp. And the first thing he said was, well, he was glad to see that our engineers can read. Oh, he had me dead to rights, because he was good. He was smooth. He had everybody laughing. He did a heck of a job. But I did that, and I thought, man, I said, that was uncomfortable. But it was a learning experience, and with time, you start to realize it's not so bad to do something uncomfortable. You often hear people say that there are no stupid questions. And I thought, well, that in itself isn't a very smart statement, because I think there are a lot of stupid questions. But it's important that you ask them, because you can't get anywhere without being curious, without finding things out. And there's really no penalty. There's no penalty for asking a dumb question. So why not? It can't hurt you at all. And somebody else is sitting there thinking the same thing. They just don't want to ask it. They don't have the guts to ask it. Many years ago, a famous president asked not what you can do for your country. And I think what that's all about, and what I think E-Town does real well here, is encourage you to reach out to help others and to give back. It's not a lesson that I learned young in life. I didn't learn it for a long time. And what you find out is how valuable that really is. It gives you a much better sense of why you're here. And you just can't put the price on that. All right. Thanks for listening today. And any other questions that come up? Thanks, Jeremy. Even dumb questions.
There's a question on that.
How did it describe the major health
Okay, how did my major help me? Parts of my major were helpful. As a chemical engineer, it helped me get my first job out of college, so that was really important. And Nestle was a great place to work. I learned a lot there from a lot of different people. And in general, the engineering education helps you problem solve. It's a lot about solving problems. So I think the concepts were useful. I can't say I ever used any of the organic chemistry or any of the nuclear physics or any of the things related to the ideal gas law. But a few of the things do come in handy. And in a small company like Martin's, I do get involved as an operations person. I do get involved in the plant engineering type things. So it has helped me over the years when we have to design a production line or we look at purchasing equipment. So it has helped me in those aspects. Yes, sir?
Just curious about your career path from Nestle to Martin's.
All right, Martin's is a family business. So I grew up working there. And so I got out of college, and I'm like, I can't go back. I can't go back to work for Dad again. I'm 22 years old, and I don't think this would go well. And so, and I thought, let's get out in the world. And I didn't know where I'd end up. Graduated from college in '82, and it was like a mini recession then. And so I had a lot of job interviews, but I only ended up with one job offer. So by default, I ended up in Nestle because that's where I got the job, and it turned out to be a good fit because they're another food company. It could have ended up at DuPont or somebody like that, where I would have, who knows where, it might have gone down a different path. Once I was up there, my dad would badger me a good bit about coming back to work in the family business, and eventually I came back because it's a little bit coming back home to some extent. Also, I had to live in upstate New York. Which wasn't a bad place, but it's very cold.
It's very cold.
It's like this, like today. It's a middle of May. You don't cut the grass till about May 20th.
And you don't even need an air conditioner.
You don't need an air conditioner. You're right. I used to laugh because people complained about the summer heat, and I thought it didn't warm up yet. It's all relative, but. But came back home and got back in the chip business. I think for me too, it was, you have different choices. When you're in a big company, you've got some advantages for training and learning and traveling. In a small company, you've got a bigger chance to make an impact on the whole company that I wouldn't have had at a larger company. And the snack business is a lot of fun. It's just, we talk about, we make potato chips, but really what we market and what you're selling is fun. Because if it's not fun to eat, people aren't going to buy it.
Do you have plans to get into the Jay's Nest on campus here? Because I haven't seen the Martins in a really.
That is a pretty good question. Because
Make that happen.
I think we're about 2 weeks from that happening.
Yes.
I just heard from one of our sales guys that we're close to having the chips actually go in. It'll probably happen in time for the end of the semester, but it'll be there next semester in the fall. Or for the summers, it'll be here in the summer.
Yeah, I can't wait for that to happen. Can you just talk a little bit about your sustainability efforts that you're using at the company?
Sure.
That might be of interest.
Yeah, I know it's a little interesting because a little bit like nutrition, the environmental conversation has shifted over the years, and now the buzzword is sustainability, and before that it was green. Well, our practices go back quite a few years, and they're closer to how farming operations, for some of you that are familiar with farming operations, pretty much nothing goes to waste. And the original founder of Martin's was Harry Martin, Harry was white. And they were farmers. And I can tell you from firsthand experience when I was 11 years old, Harry didn't waste anything. There was nothing went to waste. I mean, it went for animal feed or it was sold. There was very little waste. And so what we've done at Martin's for many years is anything that's edible that would not be used in the final product, we've kept separate for animal feed. And anything that's the dirt, so the raw side of the dirt on the potato, we keep that separate, and that goes back to the farmer to be land applied on the farm. Cardboard, anything that's cardboard that we're not going to reuse, we bale that cardboard and it goes back to a mill where they turn it back into cardboard again. Most cardboard's one of the most recycled products there is. I think the cardboard we get is about 3/4 recycled content. So cardboard is very well recycled. So, and it's easy to do, and it's also it doesn't cost you money because you all pay for the material. Some of the other things we do on the resource side is we recover heat to heat the building. When you cook potato chips, potatoes are 80% water. So basically, and a chip is 1.5% water. So you have to boil all this water. And you boil all this water and you see steam. My dad used to tell me you can always find a chip, if you look for the steam, you can find a chip factory wherever town you're in, because there's always a lot of steam coming out of the top of the stacks. So in that process, we have all this steam going out the stack. And what we've done is we've put heat exchangers, that's where I use my degree. We put heat exchangers in the stack, and we recover some of that heat from the steam, and we get almost all of the building heat for free off of the stacks. So that saves energy that way. The other thing we do for energy savings is in the lighting controls. Our building is 80,000 square feet, but the majority of it is warehouse. So it just takes so much room to store all the cases of snack foods, and also the cardboard that we use, and the film, and the seasonings. There's a lot of materials that we go through. And not everybody is in that every inch of that warehouse all the time. So every single light in the warehouse has its own sensor, and it comes on from somebody walking underneath it. So the lights are only on as needed in the warehouse. And again, that's saving electricity and helping the environment.
You gotta tell them about that water. That wiped me out, how you recycle.
Oh, recycle the water, okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's two things we do on the water side to save water as well, and it sort of came out of necessity. For years we were on wells. We didn't get public water until about 15 years ago, so we really always had to conserve our water. So we use a low water process for peeling, and then we recycle the water about 5 times. And when we're peeling the potatoes, we only use fresh water at the very end. So most of the peeling is done with the muddy water. At the very end, we use fresh water. And the other thing we do is the heat recovery stack, where we in the wintertime, where we get heat from the stack. The steam that condenses, we capture that, and it's about 2 gallons a minute when we're running. And we run that back through the potato washing, the very beginning of the potato washing process. So instead of putting that water down the drain, we're using that water. And we looked at that setup, and if we ever found a way to dump off enough waste heat, we could almost get enough water out of potatoes to cover all the peeling activity. So, and approach zero. Frito-Lay has a plant in Arizona. They've done like a model, and they've got almost a zero, what they call a zero output or zero waste plant. And that's some of the things they've done down there in Arizona, similar to that. I've used solar panels and things like that.